The history and culture of the United States. Today we'll be discussing the history of the United States. The main idea: the United States, the world's first modern democracy, expanded from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast over time. A few things to keep in mind while listening to today's notes and taking your notes is that you should be able to identify when the Europeans first began settling in North America. You should be able to explain why were enslaved Africans brought to the colonies. You should be able to summarize how did British colonists feel about England leading up to the Revolutionary War. And you should be able to recall the discovery of what natural resource brought hundreds of thousands of people to California in the late 1840s. The first modern democracy. Long before Italian explorer Christopher Columbus sailed to the Americas in 1492, Native people lived on the land that is now the United States. These Native Americans developed many distinct cultures. Soon after Columbus and his crew explored the Americas, other Europeans began to set up colonies there. The American colonies. Europeans began settling in North America and setting up colonies in the 1500s. A colony is a territory inhabited and controlled by people from a foreign land. By 1733, the British had 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast. New cities in the colonies, such as Boston and New York, became major seaports. As European colonies grew, many indigenous or native people were forced off the land or died of diseases brought by Europeans. Some British colonists lived on plantations. A plantation is a large farm that grows mainly one crop. Many colonial plantations produced tobacco, rice, or cotton. From 1619 to 1808, about 453,000 enslaved Africans were forcibly brought to what is now the United States to work on plantations. During the colonial period, Europeans from various ethnic and religious groups arrived in the colonies, looking for religious freedom and economic opportunities. For example, Anabaptists from Germany settled in places like Pennsylvania. Jews, first from Spain and Portugal, and later from Germany and Eastern Europe, moved to port cities like New York and Charleston, South Carolina. By the 1770s, many colonists in America were unhappy with the British monarchy. They wanted independence from Britain. In July 1776, the colonial representatives created and adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document stated that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Although not everyone in the colonies was considered equal, the Declaration was a great step toward equality and justice. To win their independence, the American colonists fought the British in the Revolutionary War. First, colonists from Massachusetts fought in the early battles of the war in and around Boston. As the war spread west and south, soldiers from all the American colonies joined the fight against Britain. In 1781, the American forces under General George Washington defeated the British Army at the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia. With this defeat, Britain recognized the independence of the United States. As a consequence, Britain granted all of its lands east of the Mississippi River to the new nation. The colonists then worked to form a new government based on rule by representatives of the people instead of rule by a monarch. They formed the first modern democracy. Expansion and industrial growth. After gaining independence, the United States gradually expanded west. Despite the challenges of crossing swift-moving rivers and traveling across rugged terrain and huge mountains, people moved west for land and plentiful resources. These first settlers who traveled west were called pioneers. Many followed the 2,000-mile Oregon Trail west from Missouri to the Oregon Territory. Groups of families traveled together in wagons pulled by oxen or mule. The trip was harsh. Food supplies and water were scarce. While many pioneers headed west seeking land, others went in search of gold. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 had a major impact on the country. The lure of gold brought hundreds of thousands of people to California. By 1850, the population of the United States exceeded 23 million, and the country stretched all the way to the Pacific Ocean. In order to promote the settling of the rural West, the federal government enacted laws giving away land to anyone, including women, immigrants, and African Americans, willing to farm it. This public policy was called the Homestead Act. 1/10 of all land in the United States was settled under this act. As the United States expanded, the nation's economy also grew. By the late 1800s, the country was a major producer of goods like steel, oil, and textiles, or cloth products. The steel industry grew around cities that were located near coal and iron ore deposits. Most of these new industrial cities were in the Northeast and Midwest. The country's economy also benefited from the development of canals and railroads. These technologies helped industry and people move farther into the interior. Attracted by a strong economy, millions of people immigrated or came to the United States for better jobs and land. Immigration from European countries was especially heavy in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Immigrants supplied labor to fuel the economy. Immigration also brought groups of people who had not previously interacted with each other. Sometimes this created conflict as groups competed with each other for jobs and space. The growth of industry had some negative effects. Mines and factories were often unsafe for workers. People were injured or killed on the job. Employers' desire to make money conflicted with workers' concerns. In the early 1900s, workers of different backgrounds began to work together in unions and with others, like politicians and journalists, to make factories and mines safer. Laws were passed making workplaces safer. Unions and workplace reform helped more workers achieve economic stability. Other groups and organizations also worked together to solve issues of overcrowding and poor living conditions in the cities. Wars and peace. The United States came into conflict with other countries and fought in several wars during the 1900s. Many Americans died in two major wars, World War I and World War II. After World War II, most of the once strong European and Asian nations were struggling to rebuild. The United States and the Soviet Union became rival superpowers in what was known as the Cold War. The Cold War lasted until the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed. During the Cold War, U.S. troops also served in long wars in Korea in the 1950s and in Vietnam in the 1960s and 1970s to keep communism from spreading. In 1991, the United States fought Iraq in the Persian Gulf War. In the early 2000s, the United States military fought long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The United States fought these wars for several reasons, including promoting and protecting democracy, protecting American citizens, and protecting American economic interest and stability. Today, the United States is a member of many international organizations. The headquarters of one such organization, the United Nations, is located in New York City. About 190 countries are UN members. The United States is one of the most powerful members.